David Hufford later on, when I spoke with him at Esalen, he talked about the belief in spirits as kind of like the cut-off point between the modern and the pre-modern, or modern and pre-modern ways of thinking. One of the strangest things that happened in that very first seance was I saw this green mask kind of appear over the medium's face, and it looked kind of like a Chinese monk's kind of face. That's how I kind of like describe it. But you know, kind of stereotypical, cartoon-like maybe, or caricature-like maybe. But it was like a hallucination. It was this green mask, and it just sort of slid down and sort of disappeared. We've had such a problem in our Western culture of even coming to terms with the fact that, you know, plants and trees and the things that are immediately obvious in our environment have got intelligence and consciousness and that kind of stuff. So it's not surprising that we're going to have difficulty trying to grasp or grapple with, you know, non-physical consciousness.
Welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore mysticism, esoterica, and the world of the spirits and everything in between. Today we welcome Dr. Jack Hunter. Dr. Hunter is an anthropologist exploring the borderlands of consciousness, religion, ecology, and the paranormal. He is a tutor with the Sophia Centre of the Study of Cosmology and Culture, University of Wales Trinity Saint David, and teaches on the MA in Ecology and Spirituality and the MA in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology. He's authored numerous books, most recently publishing Manifesting Spirits, an Anthropological Study of Mediumship and the Paranormal, and he edited Greening the Paranormal, exploring the ecology of extraordinary experience. Now, this was a really enjoyable conversation that took many twists and turns, and we discussed the influence of Jack's own childhood and teenage experiences that formed his interest in his chosen field of expertise, and Jack takes us on a journey through his fieldwork in mediumship at the Bristol Spirit Lodge in the UK, to his thoughts on how we develop more harmonious relationships between human and non-human worlds. And somewhere along the line, we talk about our own gardens and our relationships with them, which I think is slightly my fault, to be fair. In the Plus show, we go deeper into nature as an intelligence, and we discuss Jack's upcoming projects, particularly one on high strangeness and religious experiences. We also discuss how we interact with beings that have a totally different perception, or may have a totally different perception of time to us, and the complexities of how that will affect our relationship and understanding of each other. And Jack offers a really interesting metaphor with the life cycle of ancient trees, which forms a useful framing for this strange concept. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, then sign up to the Patreon and you'll get the Plus show along with a host of other benefits. You can also buy me a coffee via my Linktree and YouTube videos. As always, I'm interested in hearing people's experiences about the other, so do reach out to me either on Patreon or Twitter or Insta, and I'll be delighted to hear from you. Okay, that's it from me. Let's get on with the show. Dr. Jack Hunter, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the Spirit Box. Big fan of yours, been following your work for some time, so I'm really delighted to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
So one of the things that I kind of wanted to ask you about, I wanted to ask you about your work broadly, but obviously you've got your new title that came out towards the tail end of last year about manifesting spirits from your anthropological work.
Yeah,
and kind of focusing on was it your PhD work?
Yeah, it's basically my thesis. There's a few little bits that have been removed from it and a few little bits that have been added into it, but essentially it's the whole kind of the whole thesis. Yeah.
So with that work as a whole, you know, and your own, I guess the big question for me is, did your worldview change over that period of research, over the period of writing the thesis? Like what affected doing that work and going to Bristol
Mm.
Spirit Lodge? What did it have on you and your own belief, or how you
Yeah,
saw the world?
it's a good question because I've been thinking a lot recently about the interaction between the kinds of things that we experience and our backgrounds and our pre-existing beliefs and expectations and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite useful to think about this kind of thing. um, because obviously before I had even gone to the Bristol Spirit Lodge, I was already interested in things, and I'd already had my own, psychedelic experiences and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So in a sense, I was primed and ready for, by the time I got to the Bristol Spirit Lodge, to be able to, uh, to think about those kind of things, on their own terms rather than trying to just explain them away. Because I've already had experiences, hallucinatory experiences, and I had an interaction with fairies on my first mushroom trip.
Oh wow, cool. We'll have to
Mm.
discuss that in a bit. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So, all of these things had obviously had an impact on me even before I'd gone to the Bristol Spirit Lodge. And, all of those things had also had an impact on me before, in my interests in exploring, religious studies and anthropology and that kind of thing, because, I had my own extraordinary experiences. And, these are disciplines out there that are trying to make sense of those kinds of things. So I was obviously drawn into it from my own, pre-existing interests.
Hmm.
But that said, there was stuff that the experience of going to the Bristol Spirit Lodge kind of new things, new things that I hadn't thought about before. Because to be honest, I'd never really been that interested in spirits. And you're thinking about the like the paranormal and growing up, I was always much more interested in UFOs,
Mm.
and I was always much more interested in things like vampires and stuff, which I just thought were way cooler than spirits of the dead, which are basically just humans.
I'm laughing because I think for a sizable amount of my childhood, like when I was asked what did I want to be, I was like, I want to be a vampire. Like for a long time. I read that, the little ladybird books you get when you're a kid. I got the Dracula one, and I totally
Well,
identified.
yes.
Yeah, I totally identified with Dracula, and it's like, well,
Yeah, the Ladybird Dracula book is what got me hooked on Dracula as well.
no
I
way.
remember
Oh,
I saw it in must have been quite young at the time.
mm,
Must have been about 4 years old, but
yeah,
I used to live in Liverpool, and we went to like a big supermarket kind of thing in Liverpool, and I saw it on one of those, like, those wire stand things,
yeah.
this Ladybird Dracula book, and it just imprinted in my mind.
Mm,
And I can't remember if I was allowed to buy it or anything like that, but I did. I bought it again recently, and it
cool.
just brings back that feeling.
Yeah, yeah. I do think a lot of kind of these interests that we have do go back from those points of like childhood, just exploration and and that kind of free imagination that children have, but wanting there to be more. And I don't think you ever stop searching for that. I think
No,
that's
definitely not.
yeah.
And it's also the kind of things that you're exposed to as well.
Mm,
So, maybe if I'd been exposed to, or if this Dracula book hadn't popped up to take my attention, I
mm.
might have got into mummies more or into, zombies or something. But vampires and UFOs were the kind of like my cool things for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
And I always thought that ghosts and spirits were a bit boring. But when I was at university, um, I had a great session with Fiona Bowie, who would go on to be my supervisor. We had a class with her, like a module
Hmm.
on religion and cosmology, and she introduced us to the work of the anthropologist Edith Turner, and this really famous paper that Edith Turner wrote called "The Reality of Spirits: Is it a tabooed or permitted field of study?" and it was published in 1993 or something, probably around about the same time I saw that Ladybird Dracula book. And yeah, but all of a sudden it just clicked that, wait a minute, in this paper she described her own experience of seeing this ectoplasmic kind of spirit manifestation, but she talks about how there are these kinds of experiences that are reported around the world, and anthropologists dismiss it time and time again, and that kind of thing. And it was that moment then when I read that paper that I thought, actually, spirits are pretty interesting. Because they're also very common. Like I'd seen spiritualist churches and things like that around Bristol. So it's all of a sudden, the fact that spirits are kind of like this. Well, David Hufford later on, when I spoke with him at Esalen, he talked about the belief in spirits as kind of like the cutoff point between the modern and the pre-modern, or modern and pre-modern ways of thinking.
Right.
And the idea that I noticed then that people even in Bristol evidently still believed in spirits. So it wasn't something that was like a primitive or something that had been evolved away or anything. I could walk down the street and see a spiritualist church, and if I went in there would be people who were claiming to regularly interact with spirits. So the whole question about what are these spirits, and what is it that makes these people do it? Because if you look at it from the common, the mainstream perspective, it's all supposed to be delusion and fraud and things like that. And yet people continue to go to seances and continue to go to spiritualist churches, and people continue to report these experiences and things. So obviously it's something that continues to go on. So I started to go to a spiritualist church in not far from Ashley Down in Bristol. I was at the Belmont Road Spiritualist Church. That's what it was called.
Okay.
And it was like a Victorian, old Victorian suburb kind of vibe, and these old houses. And I went inside it, inside the Spiritualist Centre. And the only thing that that made it apparent that it was a spiritualist centre was a big plaque outside that said Belmont Road Spiritualist Centre. But when I went in, it felt like a bed and breakfast kind of vibe in there. And there was potpourri and like plush carpets and things like that, and pictures of like Jesus and stuff. And it was really, it clicked to me then as well that there was this whole other world, of spiritualists in Bristol that I'd never really thought about before. And I spent a while going to this spiritualist church and just trying to get the feel for it. And I noticed things like, like just to bring it all back home again, that people were talking about spirits in there as if they were everyday part of their lives, not some kind of like fanciful, abstract kind of idea, like when you go to church and they talk about God and stuff like that. It's always like lofty and abstract, and you don't see how it necessarily relates to your life. Well, some people probably do. But these guys were saying, that when the CD player was malfunctioning and things like that, that spirits are obviously doing that. And it just, again, is one of those clicking points that for some people as well, these things are not abnormal or strange or anything like that. In their worlds, it's something that is totally taken for granted. But because of my like shyness and things like that at the time, and I was only an undergraduate student at the time as well, that I didn't really click in this spiritualist church. It was a nice place, and I went to some sessions there. I did some evening mediumship development and things like that as well.
Cool.
Which was very interesting, but I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere near becoming a group member or getting into the inner circle of it. And I think it probably is my own fault, because obviously you could do it if you wanted to. But so I thought, maybe I could find somewhere that was a bit more like personal and intimate, and where I wouldn't feel so anonymous, like I just turned up in the middle of a crowd for a service at 12 o'clock and I could be anyone. So I did a little search and I found online, really amazingly, really, this Bristol Spirit Lodge place, which was just 20 minutes up the road from where I was living. I was living on Ashley Down on Gloucester Road, and it was in Filton, so it's just a little bit up the road in Bristol. And I was like, oh wow, this is amazing, and they're actually doing trance mediumship and physical mediumship as well, which is the kind of thing that I didn't hear anything about ectoplasm or anything like that in the spiritualist church.
Yeah.
It was all clairvoyant kind of mediumship. Which is interesting as well. And I did have a couple of interesting readings there too. But yeah, and so I got in touch, and basically she invited me over to come and have a chat, and it was good. We got off to a good start, and then she said, do you want to come to a séance? And then that was it. I went to the first séance. And that seance as well, the very first experience was the most profound seance I think I'd had. It's kind of similar, I think, to, with psychedelics and stuff like that. The first experience is often the most profound experience. And other ones never really match up to the expectation after that. Except for every now and again. But at this seance, I saw these. It was in the daytime. There's one major thing that shook me because I was expecting it to be, in the nighttime. The seance would be at night, and it would be in like a Victorian mansion or something like that. But actually, it was in a garden shed in the suburbs of Bristol, and it was at 9 o'clock in the morning. So I had to get up out of my student routine and trudge there. And it was a really icy cold day. And the pavements were slippy, so I had to concentrate all the way there. So it was a very interesting day. And I got there, and we went out into the lodge, and I saw the medium going into the trance. But I started to see these like little flashes of light and stuff in the cabinet behind her. They seemed to me to be they seem to be like hallucinations. So what I mean by like I've been primed so that I could kind of tell the difference between hallucinations and maybe something that is objective. So it felt like they were hallucinations. But one of the strangest things that happened in that very first seance was I saw this green mask kind of appear over the medium's face. And it looked kind of like a Chinese monk's kind of face. That's how I kind of like describe it. But kind of stereotypical, cartoon-like maybe, or caricature-like maybe. But it was like a hallucination. It was this green mask, and it just sort of slid down and sort of disappeared. And again, I was like, that's a weird thing to see, but I'll keep it to myself. This is my first seance. I don't want to seem like some crazy guy who's stumbled in and claiming they can see like weird green masks and stuff. But then, and I was sure that it was like a hallucinatory subjective kind of experience, and that nobody else would have seen it anyway. But then when we went back into the house to have biscuits and to discuss things, a couple of people independently said, "Did you see that green face?" And I had no choice but obviously to say, well, yeah, I did, but I thought it was a hallucination or something. So that, the very first seance was like, had these weird lights that I saw. The medium went into their trance, and it all seemed kind of like something was genuinely happening, like they were genuinely having some kind of an altered state of consciousness. And then there was this semi-subjective kind of hallucinatory experience thing that was verified by someone else. So nothing much more like intense than that happened. Well, actually, no, my hand got possessed one time, which was quite an intense experience later on.
Right.
But it was that was the best kind of seance that I'd had, and then other seances never really lived up to that kind of experience. But it was enough to make me realize that There's more to it going, more stuff going on in the seances than, and you can't just say it's fraud, because you go into these places and for some reason you can have these weird hallucinations that match up with other people's experiences.
Yeah.
So there's obviously something more going on, and that's really what the thesis was all about. And I suppose that was the biggest impact on me, was that it made me realize that there was all of this other potential, all these other potential processes going on.
That sounds incredible. Like, and it's interesting that you talk about like psychedelic experience that kind of primed you for it, to kind of be able to differentiate between kind of hallucination and something else. But I mean, again, it's the idea of, why would you look at hallucinogenics in the first place? But it's the same territory. It's looking to explore the other. And when you mentioned earlier, because I have to ask you, I've got to come back to the fairies stuff. I mean, that's really in my wheelhouse. When you had that experience that you described earlier, where you interacted with some fairies, like, was that a very intense one? Was it an immersive, or was it like kind of like open eyes hallucination, closed eyes? Like, I mean,
it was again, it was my first ever mushroom experience, and I was quite young at the time. Not too young, but maybe too young, a little bit too young. And again, there were other things that have got to be taken into the context of the whole experience. So we were in my best friend's older brother's bedroom.
It's always an older brother. It's always an older brother.
It is. And it was in this it was like 16th century part of the house, very old. And he was into Wicca, and we had a circle drawn out on the floor in there, and all of this kind of stuff as well. But we weren't doing that then. We weren't doing magic, and we weren't, I wasn't going into that experience wanting to see fairies or anything like that. But it was obviously a very intense experience. But then, and there was all sorts of other things as well, but there was this one particular moment that stuck with me, where I looked across to this chest of drawers in the corner of the room, and the top drawer was kind of hanging out, like a kind of at an angle, and in the grain of the wood of the drawer, there was this procession, two-dimensional procession. And I've written about this experience in a couple of places. I've actually got a chapter about it coming out soon. But these creatures looked like something like Brian Froud kind of creatures, like Dark Crystal, the Fairies book, and that kind of thing. And this chapter that I've just written is about the weird interplay of experience and culture in that way, but which is something very interesting to think about. But they kind of had that kind of Brian Froudy kind of vibe to them. And there was one that was kind of like a female that seemed to be leading the procession, and was a little bit bigger than the other ones maybe. And they kind of turned, or this one turned its head towards me in 2 dimensions. So it was kind of like an animation. And kind of clocked me. And then they just sort of carried on with their procession. They carried on moving through the grain of the wood, and I don't know what happened. Like, I don't know whether they went off the end of the wood, or whether they just receded into it, or went round the corner, or because I must have, for whatever reason, lost interest in it. I just drifted off and looked at something else. But the thing that was really interesting about these creatures was that there was other kind of fractal kind of chaos going on around these things, and in the rest of the trip, deep kind of like organic movement and things like that. But these were like very deliberately going, like in a straight line in a procession that seemed to have, they seemed to be doing something deliberately with intent.
It's a purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was really what I think differentiated it from the rest of the hallucinatory kind of stuff. Well, they may have been hallucinatory, but they were hallucination. They had an intent and a purpose, and it was something that was not to do with me. They were doing their own thing, and it was just happenstance that I caught a glimpse of it.
Yeah, almost stumbled upon it.
Yeah. Which, later on, researching fairy lore and all of that kind of stuff, it's just very common, isn't it? It's, you see the fairies doing their thing, they're not really interested. Usually they're not that fussed, and they want to get on with their own thing, and they usually do. So yeah, it really stuck with me. And I remember the next day when my mum came to pick me up from my friend's house, and I was probably still tripping, but trying not to, and all of that kind of stuff. But I was also probably quite emotional as well. But I remember saying that I'd seen fairies, and I was met with, kind of like disbelief, kind of thing. And I realized it was a bit upsetting in a way, but I realized that, there are certain kinds of experiences that you can have that are, that also, if you talk about them, that people think that you're weird, or that somehow means that you've like lost the plot or something.
Yeah, there's some real taboos.
There are.
Yeah.
My mum's not like, open-minded and everything's fine and good. But at the time, it made me realize something about that kind of experience. And maybe that is, again, one of the reasons why I've gone down this route of researching this stuff, is trying to understand all of that baggage and what the real deal is with these things and that kind of thing.
I think that's a really interesting angle, on the whole subject matter. Why is there such a taboo around it? And it does seem to kind of skirt fear, and there's obvious reasons to be afraid of some spirits. Some spirits aren't very, cordial, and don't have great intent, but it's how that kind of fear then kind of gets masked by, well, these things aren't real. There's nothing there, and how that shift happened is quite interesting. And I think sometimes you often see that in people's reactions when you talk about these things, that
I think
fear is behind it. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I think there's a bit of a relationship here with some of the themes in Greening the Paranormal book that I edited, which is about the kind of like ecological strands in the paranormal and extraordinary experience and that kind of stuff. And I think, in the same way that predators in the ecosystem, what have we done to the predators in the ecosystem? Predators above us, we've kind of we've made them extinct and that kind of thing. We've hunted them until there's none left, and we've kind of make the world safe for humans in that way. And I think, we haven't hunted the fairies to extinction or anything like that, but we have really kind of like shut ourselves off from the idea that there are predators, or that there are things higher up on the food chain than we are, and we really reject it, push it as far away as we can. But I think that the fairies are, they do that because they're not always pleasant. You can have a fluffy cat, and you can also have, a giant ferocious tiger that's going to eat you.
Yeah.
They're both cats. And it's the same, with fairies. You can have a pleasant fairy encounter, or you can have that very terrifying encounter as well.
Yeah.
And then we like to push that away and forget that that kind of thing can happen.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it does happen, it really puts us back into the ecosystem. And I think part of that is, this is also part of the reason why a lot of extraordinary experiences, one of the kind of feedback effects, or the kind of the influences of those experiences, is to make people more aware of the environment and ecology and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden you realize that you're not separate from those systems and processes. Once you've been abducted by a UFO or something, suddenly you realize, actually, I am part of this system.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not separate from it. I'm not in my human bubble. I'm actually a part of the ecosystem. And I better start thinking about that, because it's one of the common interesting threads that runs through all of this stuff, is the effect of these kinds of experiences on people, and near-death experiences and things like that, psychedelic experiences, and even all sorts of other kinds of paranormal experiences have that, mystical experiences too, have that effect of making people more aware of their position in ecology. And I think, yeah, it's got something to do with that, realizing that we are still a part of the food chain of fairies and goblins and, or Cthulhu up there.
Yeah, and I guess in that realization that kind of we're not top of it, which is always a little bit jarring.
Oh yeah,
I think that
that's one of the things, like Charles Fort. Sorry,
no, go ahead, please.
I just think it just made me think then about Charles Fort and John Keel and those kind of guys, and the way they suggested that we are actually just kind of like cattle. That kind of idea. We have a very high view of ourselves, but actually from a cosmic perspective, maybe we're, well, probably are just a part of this
Yeah.
seething mass of life on the planet, not necessarily anything special.
Yeah, I think, but I think it's an important reflection, like, because this whole thing about, like, we get so wrapped up in our own self-importance that we allow things like, ecological catastrophes to happen, like,
Yeah,
and which is really, why I'm deeply appreciative of that book. You edited the book, right? The yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, like, it's an important idea that, like, in the greening the paranormal, that
I think it's
understanding we're part of nature.
yeah, I think it runs deep to the core of our kind of issues with the paranormal. The reasons why our culture rejects it and all of that kind of stuff. I think it's deeply entwined with our cultural ideas about ecology and our place in the world, and how our worldview for the past, well, at least since the Industrial Revolution, but probably going way further back before that as well, has been this drive to consume and to produce and all of that kind of stuff. And that's been the real focus. It hasn't been to look at the interconnectedness of things and to realize the mutual, not mutual, that the, what Arnie Ness called, like, what's the word? Intrinsic value of things. We don't see the value of things for themselves, but for the things that they can do to us. So, the trees don't have a value for themselves. They have a value because they are a source of, materials.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of movement away from understanding the complexities of the world that we live in and reducing it down to the simple, economic stuff. That also has led to the disappearance, or the marginalization of mystical and paranormal experiences as well, because you don't go out into the world to interact with the trees anymore because of their own intrinsic value. you go there to chop the tree down. Instead, if you go there to interact with the tree on its own terms, then you might in fact have a paranormal experience, or an experience that would be labeled as paranormal.
And thinking about that and kind of pulling that thread a bit, and you think about what that materialist society does believe in, when it thinks it's the focus on kind of like the healthy economy. We'll have news about like what our gross domestic product is and inflation. Those things aren't real. Like we believe in these things that are more nebulous than the idea of non-human intelligence. Like well, depends where you sit, I guess. But like
Yeah.
anything, but like I love that idea, of greening the paranormal. I think it's an important one, and as you overlaid that, a lot of our ideas around conservation, don't necessarily have their roots in the best place. They also kind of have that idea of materials, really preserving materials for elite use, rather than kind of actually preserving these areas just for their intrinsic value.
Yeah, which is why I think there's this, traditional ecological knowledge and all of that kind of stuff, indigenous worldviews that have been, that have grown from in a particular ecological niche and that are like fully embedded in there. There's a lot that we can kind of learn from that now, to do with reconnecting with, our own local place and interacting with the kinds of things that are in that place, plants and animals and rocks and all of those kind of things. I think that's where we need to go. And in doing that, I think we'll also realize that a lot of these paranormal kinds of things are sort of part of the course of that, of re-engaging, of re-participating in the natural world, and realizing that, the plants and animals and maybe even some rocks and whatever have got intelligence at least, but consciousness and intelligence and all of that kind of stuff. But also cultures. There's loads of interesting stuff at the moment coming out about non-human cultures in non-human species. It just, when you start to think from this like more indigenous perspective, about the importance of establishing good relationships with the world rather than using it for human consumption or human value, then a lot of things start to kind of fall into place. It's just I just despair a little bit about the way that our world is going, but I think also there's a lot of potential good stuff as well.
No, I feel you on that one. I get where you're going. Like I like, even from the kind of, I always look at kind of how, like, the space we're talking about. You could talk about spirits, or you get into magic, and you get into kind of all these different fields. You end up in a garden, and you end up conversely from that garden in the kitchen. That this is what happens. You go back to kind of like, to slower ways of living, because you're spending time with things. And I think the phrase you used about the innate value of things, like that, like once you get into this territory, and if you, well, again, different strokes, different folks, but there's so many people I know who now, through kind of their own spiritual beliefs that are magic based, they always end up kind of like growing their own plants, making their own tinctures, making their own oils. They all have a magical purpose, and it's like stuff that you would think of like, well, that's just a crappy weed, right? You now read about it and you go, whoa, well, this thing has a whole raft of different uses. And now what it was a weed has got its own special pot, and it is tended to, and it's cared to, and it's loved, and it's sung to, and it's a totally different way of seeing different aspects of nature. It does change your life. And I suspect are you a bit of a gardener as well, or
I am. I'm not a great, excellent gardener
Yeah.
or anything, but I have got my vegetable patch, and I love being in the garden. And I've been trying I've been trying some kind of like gardening magic in my
Cool.
garden, picking up,
Awesome.
but nothing specific, no kind of I'm not doing any kind of ritual or anything, but from the kind of cross-cultural reading that I've been doing about gardening magic and the different magical ways that people use and interact with gardens, I've just been taking little ideas, but ones that kind of feel relevant as well. So I was reading about these stones in was it in Papua New Guinea, and they have these magical gardens, and the gardens are very dangerous kinds of places because they're kind of halfway between the human world and the wild world. So the places where spirit interactions take place, liminal places. And in this way of thinking, the gardens were kind of like the special place for women as well, where women would go and talk about women's things. So they were kind of like a special place in that sense as well.
Yeah.
But they would have, because they were these dangerous places where these entities might appear, they would bring in protective, like apotropaic objects, like especially things like stones with holes in.
Yeah.
In Papua New Guinea, or I think it was Papua New Guinea anyway. And then I was thinking, well, this just sounds a lot like hagstones and that kind of stuff. So I was like, well, that actually, when we moved into this house, there was already hagstones on the front doorstep. So I took them and put them in the vegetable patch. I don't know if they've had any effect, but I'm just accumulating magical objects that I find in the vegetable patch, seeing what will happen.
Absolutely.
I think it helps you to it mediates between you and the garden or the environment, through these objects. It gives you a way of establishing a relationship with the garden. Cool.
Yeah, it is really cool, and like I tend to kind of overlay all the standard stuff that I do in the garden, with a kind of a mystical framework on everything. It's all some really deep, meaningful shit to me. Composting, massive, huge spiritual importance to me. But like one of the things that kind of, that really moves me about like my own garden space is that, like, I used to try so hard, to grow tomatoes, and sometimes they fail, and sometimes I'd get a few or whatever. It's like now they just grow. I don't have to do anything. I if anything, I'm pulling some of them up. It's like, so it's like you get that space that you work with and you have a relationship with, that it kind of, through your own endeavor and putting so much of kind of your own desire and intention into it, it just reacts back to you.
Yeah, it's establishing a relationship, isn't it? A good relationship.
Yeah.
Mutually beneficial relationship where the plant is getting everything that it needs from you, and then it gives you. But it doesn't necessarily happen the first time. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently in terms of like spirit contact and that kind of stuff, because people sometimes ask me, I really want to get into mediumship or something. What should I do? Should I go and find a spiritualist circle or something like that? But now more and more I'm thinking, like, maybe just get a garden and maybe start that way, because there's all this new interesting science and stuff coming out now about plant intelligence and plant sentience and plant memory and learning and all that kind of stuff, which is amazing. But if you look at the traditional ecological knowledge, well, plants were persons anyway, so they had that capacity. But yeah, I mean, I think I've lost my train of thought there.
That's my fault. I'm waffling about vegetables.
No, what was I saying? It's about establishing a relationship with the and understanding the plants that you're
Mm-hmm.
living with, isn't it? And
Mm.
I was saying something about what was it about the intelligence of plants? The science is revealing it. Yeah, never mind.
It's really interesting stuff, and it's like, even kind of when you talk about that kind of mutually beneficial relationship, like beyond the food, beyond the nutrition, beyond the kind of the obvious benefits of having food that hasn't been messed with and gone through weird industrialized processes, all that kind of obvious stuff. It's
Yeah,
just that the mental health benefit is tremendous, tremendous. Like,
it is.
oh,
I mean, even just going out in nature, though, I mean,
mm,
from a mainstream scientific perspective,
yeah,
just going outside is good for you.
yeah.
So, imagine what is also going on these other more subtle levels and
Mm, mhm,
all of that kind of stuff that's all
yeah,
still going on. I
yeah,
remembered what I was going to say about when people want to develop spirit communication, and they should go out into the garden, because we've had such a problem in our Western culture of even coming to terms with the fact that plants and trees and the things that are immediately obvious in our environment have got intelligence and consciousness and that kind of stuff. So it's not surprising that we're going to have difficulty trying to grasp or grapple with non-physical consciousness
yeah,
or consciousness that hasn't even got a single body.
yeah.
So I think maybe we should start back from basics, and work our way up to more subtle forms
Hmm.
of mind and consciousness, because clearly our culture hasn't dealt with the mind and consciousness that's around us on an everyday basis yet.
Yeah, that makes a
We're
lot of
only
sense.
just deciding, not me and probably not you or other people, but scientists, that
Mm,
animals actually, feel pain and things like that.
mhm.
It's only just recently been, officially declared.
Yeah,
So our culture's got like this real slow kind of thing going on.
yeah.
Not
We've a
great.
long way to go with a lot of stuff. Like, yeah, it's, I mean, I can't even get into that space. It's just like it's just so overwhelming and depressing. What was I going to say?
Yeah,
I noticed on the cover of Manifesting Spirits, you got some of Shannon Taggart's work. Shannon was on the
oh
show
yeah,
a while ago. Really interesting to chat to her. Kind of
that's great.
mm, lovely,
Yeah, no,
fantastic
I
work.
met Shannon quite a while ago now.
Mm.
There used to be these amazing conferences called Exploring the Extraordinary. Did you ever hear
No,
of them or
no.
go to them? They used to be held up in York, and they were organized by Hannah Gilbert, who's a sociologist who did her research on spirit mediumship. And they were excellent conferences, kind of around about 2010
Right.
to like 2014. And it was through those conferences that I met Shannon. And then they did one Exploring the Extraordinary conference in Gettysburg in America,
Oh wow.
which is a funny, strange place.
Yeah. No.
And um, but a great place, because there's a guy at Gettysburg College. He's just retired now, called Professor Charles Emmons, and he was a sociologist, like writing in the 80s about the sociology of the paranormal. So a real pioneer of all that kind
Oh,
of stuff.
cool.
Yeah, and then we had this great conference at his college, and I think that was maybe that was the first time I met Shannon in person.
Mm.
But then afterwards, she came to Wales, or maybe it was before, and we went to some burial chambers, which
Oh,
was
we're good.
fun as well.
Yeah.
I got to take her to some of the burial chambers on the coast in Wales.
Yeah.
Very nice. Good day out that was.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And do you have an interest? Well, you clearly do have an interest in kind of the megalithic
Oh,
structures and that kind of stuff.
yeah, I do. I love burial chambers,
Mm.
Neolithic burial chambers,
Mm.
or dolmens, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
I just love going inside them and spending time in them. Sometimes altering my consciousness inside them,
Yeah.
and just I feel like it's an interesting way of connecting with ancestors,
Mm.
and that we have one in Dyffryn Ap Dudwy on the coast, which is where we usually go to the beach when you're allowed to travel.
Yeah.
So I get to go there quite frequently. So I've kind of really got to know the burial chambers at Dyffryn Ap Dudwy. That's where we took Shannon, because it's a very familiar one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love them. I always have. And again, I did archaeology at university. My degree was archaeology and anthropology, and I did lots of Neolithic, studying the Neolithic and that kind of thing as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's great stuff, and it has a lovely, interesting overlap in some of the, the shamanistic ideas and interpretations of prehistory.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
You know, and in terms of, I mean, I've an idea what you were doing in the chambers, like,
Okay.
you know. And did you have any kind of revelatory experiences, or?
I didn't have. It wasn't mushrooms in the chambers, just in case. But
yeah.
every time if I get to spend enough time there, and it's not just a fleeting visit. Sometimes it's very quick, but every time you can't help but feel something, I think, when you go into these places, and especially if you get to spend time in there alone.
Yeah.
There's, the fact that there was, bones in there, bodies, and that kind of stuff instantly gives it a strange feeling. For me, anyway. That there was once dead bodies inside it. So you just go in there, and it automatically puts you into an unusual kind of frame of mind, and you can only imagine what people going back inside there 4,000 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, were really thinking about when they did it. And there would have been skeletons and stuff in there with them. I had this experience once, I don't know, it might just be me, but bones and skeletons, bones and things like that really give me a strange feeling. I don't really like touching them. And when I was at university, because we were in the archaeology department, we went into this bones room, and when you're going to faint and you get that whistling in your ears that comes in, and you feel yourself going all white and clammy. That happened to me in this bones room. And I was just like, oh my God, there's dead bodies all around me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that, when you go into these tombs, that for me anyway, I feel that there has been dead bodies in there. And I feel a very visceral kind of connection with the ancestors.
Yeah. I mean, that it's really interesting to kind of think about that whole thing of like using those sites as a meditation, a meditation space. When we were chatting earlier, I mentioned some of my work in India, and one of the subject matters of my work was the Agori, the Hindu sect, who kind of practice like quite transgressive stuff as part of their kind of quest for cities and kind of their view on what reality is. But they like specifically do things like Shavasadhana, which is like corpse magic, and things like meditate on top of corpse, and covered in like they live in carnal grounds and eternal grounds, and are covered in cremation ash and that kind of stuff. Which I mentioned that not too long ago. I am on the show, or actually a friend's show. I got covered in cremation ash. I was given a blessing that I wasn't expecting, which was a face full of cremation ash.
Yeah, but it's potent stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's that whole thing of like, as you say, kind of seeing the remains, or seeing a cremation, and knowing, like, the big thing for me that hits me every time that I'm faced with that is these are the remnants of, people's dreams and aspirations and fears and loves and families and, and all that stuff, all that complexity that we have in our heads, and that is so serious and so important, and it's just gone. It literally turns to ash, and it's a useful thing in that regard to kind of realize that it's super transient, that in the grand scheme of things, like a lot of stuff that you might be really fretting about doesn't really matter, which is always it's a useful thing to know.
That's good.
But also that I think that connection to the ancestors, and your line is really important, to
It
think
is,
about where you've come from or how you got here.
definitely.
Yeah. And could I ask you what are your meditations on that?
Well, what on how we got here?
Yeah, well, on the ancestor, the ancestor kind of angle and kind of your exploration in that area.
Yeah, well, the ancestors. I have, like I said, yeah, my relationship with ancestors. I don't have like any kind of spiritual practice or anything like that, and I don't have any kind of like routine or like meditation or anything like that I do regularly. But I do have a side of myself that is kind of like always open to these kinds of things. So I do have a very real, like I think a quite a strong feeling of spirits and things like that. But it's not like a major thing in my life. I don't know if I'm answering your question properly.
I think you're answering it honestly. Like
Yeah,
yeah,
like
yeah,
in my everyday world, I don't
mm,
see spirits and things like
yeah,
that. I don't see the ancestors, and I don't feel their presence.
hmm
Um, but when I go to the burial chambers, for example, or when I go down into the bogs, or not toilets, but like the wet bog,
yeah, yeah. No, I'm from Ireland. I know what a bog is.
marshland,
Yeah,
um, or the woods,
yeah.
or I find a little like a rabbit hole, or like a something that like a mossy stone or something
Mm,
like things like that, then instantly I'm just like, there's something more.
mm,
Although I
mm,
don't, although the spirit, I'm not like a spiritual person
mm,
in my life.
mm.
I'm still quite a spiritual person. So yeah, I don't experience the ancestors all the time, but every
Yeah.
now and again I slip into a place where I do feel it, and I can accept it.
Mm.
Yeah.
I get what you're talking about. I feel a similar way, to be honest. You know, like I'm not a very good magician. I don't really practice enough. Or study enough or all that kind of stuff. I'm busy with kids. Is the honest answer. But I do I have that. I get that sense of almost amazement at what previously would have been very kind of banal things or things that I wouldn't even register. But now it's like seeing the imprint of like tracks that wild animals have across grasslands or tracks through hedges. That fascinates me. And I'll stay there and look at them. Or if I see little bits of their hair, on a fence, like I'll want to touch it and like think about it, and that really draws me in. And I don't, but I think about it in a way that gives that, I don't know, it draws out the mystic in me,
Yeah.
and I think it's talking about what you mentioned again, and you kind of really articulately put earlier about that kind of intrinsic value in
Mm,
a thing, a living thing, you
yeah.
know.
This is another interesting thread here that connects my like mediumship research to the greening the paranormal kind of ecological kind of thing. And it's like I think that there are very similar processes that are involved in the process of developing spirits in the Bristol Spirit Lodge, and the processes of establishing a relationship with for example, the spirits of place or things like that.
Mm.
So one of the things I noticed when I was doing my mediumship stuff, was that and I've been writing about this quite a bit recently, is how it wasn't like, there's this technological model of mediums that's quite popular, that they're kind of like a receiver, or they're like they're kind of like a filter, or the
Right.
brain is a computer and it's kind of tuning into spirits, and there's kind of like a technological metaphor that's being used to understand it. But what I observed when I was doing my field work was actually that this mediumship process was really like a slow, gradual kind of process. It was, and the spirits, like the process of a spirit becoming a communicating personality in a seance, wasn't an instant one, like you tune into the spirit and then you've got it. Actually, it might take like months for a particular spirit to fully express itself. And so the way that it works, or the way that I observed it, is that the circle leader kind of observes the medium going into their trance, and then the medium will do things, the body will do things, which the circle leader picks up on and kind of hones in on and focuses in on it. So for example, if the medium's finger twitches, for example, then the circle leader will be like, the medium's finger twitched, then they'll be like, can you do that again? They'll start to communicate with it. So they start to focus in on and have a communication with a very specific thing that might just be a twitching finger to begin with, but because they keep interacting with it, eventually it becomes a moving hand, and then a voice starts to talk and all of that kind of stuff. So it's this process of participation and interaction in the seances with the spirits that kind of brings them into social existence. And that's where, when you stop participating with them and interacting with them, well, then they're not really there anymore. They go back in. There's an anthropologist called Nurit Bird David who talked about this with the Nayaka people in India, and they have these practices where they bring these Devara, they call them Devara spirits, and they're kind of like nature spirits. I think they live in trees and stuff, but they can be brought in, through mediums' bodies, and they do the same thing, the same process of building up of this relationship with the particular entity, and the conversations will start off kind of like just sort of like teasing each other maybe, or whatever, encouraging them, and being the participants will be concerned, and they're like trying to bring the spirits forward and say, you can do this, all of that kind of stuff, and until eventually they can have a relationship and a conversation. And it's exactly what they're saying that happened at the Bristol Spirit Lodge. And then eventually, when a spirit has become fully kind of stabilized or whatever, I don't know what it is, but they can come through much easier, like in subsequent seances. But this process then of concentrating and focusing in on and establishing a relationship with the little things, and then building it up into a dialogue, is exactly the same kind of process that is involved in establishing a relationship with the details in the intricate features in your garden, or feeling the water in the stream and focusing in on it and building up a dialogue with the stream. Or do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's actually the process of manifesting spirits, which is what the book is about, is the same as manifesting spirits, or making intelligence, the intelligence that is present in the world, manifested, expressed. I think that's one of the interesting threads that connects this mediumship stuff to the spiritual ecology kind of angle.
Awesome. I could keep going for a long time, but I don't want to take up any more of your evening.
No, it's fine.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. what are the best places for people to find you if they want to follow your work? And
Yeah. Well, I've got a website, which is jack-hunter.webstarts.com. Classy web address. And you can find me on Google pretty easily if you just search for Jack Hunter, and or put paranormal in there, because there are other Jack Hunters out there as well. Some of them are not very savory, which is interesting. And also, I have a few different pages on Facebook. I've got a Dr. Jack Hunter page where I just post stuff on there, new things that pop up. And also, there's the page for the MA in Ecology and Spirituality on Facebook, which some people might be interested in.
okay,
This is the course that I've been working on teaching for the past year, or nearly 2 years now, actually.
right,
So yeah, search for them.
awesome. I will compile them and put them in the show notes for everybody. Brilliant. It's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you very much for coming to the Spirit Box.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to Dr. Jack Hunter for coming on the show. I really enjoyed that. It was a great conversation, and really, really interesting stuff. So I've left the links in the show notes to his presences online, where you can pick up his books or follow him on Facebook. All right, that's it from me. Talk soon and take care. Bye.